Hi everyone, and welcome to The Advocate. I'm your host, Glenn Allen. Tonight on the program, we're going to be talking about sexual abuse prevention and awareness. And joining me in studio is Brenda Symons-Moulton, and she is a trauma counselor. Brenda, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Glenn. Nice to be here.
And Karen Smith. And Karen is the executive director of, well, we like to call it the council because the name is really too long for this host to remember. But actually, I'm just joking. She is the executive director of the Community Child Abuse Council. Karen, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Glenn. Nice to be here.
And Karen, we're going to start with you because some of the folks out there who don't know what the council is, we're going to start the program tonight by having you tell everyone what the council is all about.
Sure, happy to do that. The Community Child Abuse Council is based here in Hamilton, has been around since 1976, and we work with children and youth up to 18 years who have been sexually victimized, so sexual abuse, as well as children and youth who have problem sexual behaviors, and that would include siblings or cousins within one family where sexual abuse has occurred. So that's clinical treatment for those youngsters. We also do community education work and prevention work, all aimed at the vision of the council. We believe thriving kids create thriving communities, so our aim is a little higher than just working against sexual abuse. It's aimed, all of our programs and services are aimed at that vision of helping kids thrive.
Great. Brenda, you've been involved with the council for many years.
I have.
Talk about that.
Well, I think I started becoming involved in the council in 1992, and back then we ran group programs for children and families whose lives have been impacted by sexual abuse. And then my life work has taken me, or my heart work has taken me to do trauma counseling in a variety of ways. And now I'm back at the council and happy to be back. It's my heart work, and I'm working with children and families. And I have my own private counseling practice where I work with a lot of men and women who were victims of sexual abuse when they were younger, and are moving to try and move towards healing as adults and repair their lives and have healthier lives moving forward.
And that's a big part of what we're going to be talking about tonight, because Brenda and I actually go back to those early 90s as well. And I've given Brenda permission to talk if the conversation comes up and it helps somebody who's watching tonight, if a first person story helps them. Brenda was my counselor. Because as many of you know, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And, you know, the three of us met yesterday, and we were talking about, you know, the effects that, you know, whether it's the effects of childhood sexual abuse, and we talk about the children and the program that the council has set up for the children. But there's also, and we were talking yesterday, exactly how old does the council deal with? We talk about children, but there's also youth. So how old, what's the age maximum that the council deals with?
Up to their 18th birthday.
Up to the 18th birthday. So as a counselor, Brenda, when you look back and you look to see, we talk about 1992, but when you look at things today, what do you see when you look at when I came forward?
Right.
Are you happy with the way things are going today? When you see the people coming, like men coming forward now as it was when you compare it to back then?
I think there have been some really good changes. I guess you know, and ideally, I think we'd love to live in a world that's abuse-free of all kinds of abuse.
Yeah.
I think we still have a long way to go, but I think the hope in what is happening is that more people can talk about it. I think there's a lot of push for people not to talk about this. It's a really ugly subject for many people.
Yeah.
I think the hope in what we do at the council is we see girls and boys and that are young and are able to tell their stories now.
Yeah.
But I think we're seeing a lot of adults, in particular guys, being able to come forward and say, you know, this happened to me when I was younger, and I've held this secret for many, many years. And this is how it's impacted my life, whether it's substance use or relationship troubles or problems with their own kids or education or employment. So, you know, I'm hoping our world will continue to be open to hear. Because the single biggest issue that happens for people, whether it's children or adults, is they fear they won't be believed in their families or by other people that this has happened. And yet it's had a huge impact for many, not everyone, but a huge impact on their lives.
Karen, when we were talking yesterday, we were talking about the stat that's out there that 1 in 3 girls will be a victim of an unwanted sexual act. Actually, I'll let you, because you worded it very well yesterday. So I'll just turn that over to you. Why don't you tell the viewers out there about the boys and girls in that stat?
Sure. Statistically speaking, 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually victimized before their 18th birthday. So when you think about the substantial number that represents, apart from being completely unacceptable, it also represents for us a pretty clear indication that we're not seeing all of those kids. And you know, when we talk about prevention and we talk about awareness, I think one of the important things to understand in a community like Hamilton in particular, which is very diverse, the statistics, they cross all portions of our population. So all demographics, all geographic areas, all types of children, however you want to classify them, those statistics remain the same. This is something that happens in all cultures around the world. It's not a Western concept. It's not. But we don't see that diversity reflected in the kids that come forward and who end up with us for treatment. So that's another clear indicator to us that we're not seeing all of those kids. Roughly 80% of the children who come to us for clinical treatment are referred through our local child welfare organizations.
Yeah.
That's a clear pathway, and given the criminal nature of childhood sexual abuse, that's the appropriate pathway. But as a community, I think it's important that we be aware that we're not getting all of the kids, and so there's that's an important piece to address.
Brenda, in dealing with, you know, we talk about the children who are being seen, and in our conversation yesterday, we talk about the 25% that are being seen. There's a lot that aren't being seen, and when we look at those kids that aren't being seen now, they're the ones who grow up and have to deal with. And there's, I'm going to throw some more stats out there, where we see people today, 93% of those seeking treatment for addictions and or eating disorders report being sexually abused as children. And 90% of long-term incarcerated males and 85% of long-term incarcerated females were sexually abused as children. When you look at those stats, they're staggering.
They are. And I think that's the part when we talk about prevention. I mean, I think one of the things that we really need to understand is that it's very hard to come forward and talk about this. So both with the children and adults I see, what we hear is when people ask, why didn't you tell before? They say, I didn't feel I was going to be believed, or I was threatened that something would happen to me if I told, or I was embarrassed. And especially for the men and the boys that I see, I think one thing that's just a little bit different is the amount of shame and guilt that they feel that somehow they should have protected themselves or stopped it. But we hear that from girls too,
Yeah.
where they struggle that it's their fault somehow. And I think that we have to work really hard. And there's all kinds of things we can do to make it easier for children to talk about, but even adults. And part of why so many more adults are coming forward is because they have role models now who are coming, like Sheldon Kennedy and Theo Fleury and other people that are coming forward and saying this happened.
R.A. Dickey with the Blue Jays.
Yeah, exactly. But when we look at those stats, you know, one of the things I say is we just can't afford not to deal with this issue because these are long-term consequences that really pattern people's lives. For some people, not everybody needs treatment.
Yeah.
What they do need, though, is a single caring adult who believes that they have been through trauma. But when you look at those stats, people learn to cope in very different ways, and it gets them through the trauma, but it ends up not working very well for them when they're adults.
Yeah, and we talk about stigma, and that's such a big, dirty word. And you've touched on some already. You both have. When we look at not being believed, but the shame, and what comes to mind when you hear that word stigma, Karen, when it comes to the sexual abuse and people trying to come forward and deal with this? What's the first thing or first couple of things that come to mind that we need to deal with?
Barrier is the first, and
Yeah.
bravery is the second. So there's no question that the stigma attached to sexual abuse of children in particular, but I would suggest that it's attached to children's mental health in a more broad way as well, other kinds of abuse. But certainly it's a barrier. If it stops one kid from speaking up, if it stops one teenager from confiding in someone and telling their story, then it's a barrier. Bravery is the other thing that comes to mind because in the face of that kind of stigma and feeling all that encompasses, those who do speak up and those who do keep going and finding someone and telling until eventually someone takes action, someone listens, someone believes them,
Right.
that takes incredible bravery. We work with some of the bravest young people you'll ever meet every day. And the good part of what we do is that the treatment works. So that bravery turns into kids getting their lives back. You know, their future's returned to them. The treatment is effective. They don't all need it for a long period of time, as Brenda said. Some of them may only need a short period of treatment or intervention.
Right.
The important thing is that they get what they need when they need it. We know what happens when they don't. We know that the adults, the men that you've been talking about, who went through this trauma as kids and didn't get that help, go on to face often lifelong challenges, and they range from physical health to mental health to problems with employment and relationships and education, and there isn't a part of life that isn't affected.
Yep.
So that early response to the kids that this happens to is one of our greatest tools as a community in terms of prevention, because we can prevent those children from going on to being those adults.
Yeah.
And so we've got to turn more attention to the education and awareness piece of this. It will help address that stigma. It will help remove the barrier that stigma represents.
Right.
And it makes it everybody's shared responsibility to recognize those brave kids that speak up and being that one caring adult that Brenda referred to that makes all the difference.
Very well put. If you're watching this program and you are realizing that you have something you need to talk about, there's numbers that have been coming up on the screen, crisis numbers, and we're going to go to break, and when we come back, those numbers are going to be coming up time and again. Crisis numbers, they're there for you to call, and if we can help you, that's what we're here for. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to be talking about some other things that are tough. You know, when people come forward, and when you turn and you want to charge the abuser, one of the other things that's very difficult is dealing with the so-called justice system. That and more when we return with more of The Advocate. Stay tuned. And welcome back to The Advocate. Glenn Allen alongside Brenda Symons-Moulton and Karen Smith. Tonight talking about sexual abuse prevention and awareness. And just before we went to the break, I mentioned the justice system, and I tongue-in-cheek I said, well, justice system, legal system, it's very difficult for a survivor, first of all, to stand up and charge the abuser. And I say the abuser because you taught me that. It's the abuser, not your abuser, the abuser, and that's a whole different conversation. But when you, number one, it's very important to prepare a survivor for court. And the biggest thing is that you cannot base your healing on the outcome of the trial. Can you delve more into that, please, Brenda?
I think the legal system is a very complicated and difficult system. I think people need to know that it can take. It's really important to tell. I think I want to talk about the part first about the healing for people. Okay. And I think what's really important is for many, many people, the healing has to be about their own recovery and how they're doing with it. Yeah. And the justice system, there really is, the tough piece is, how much time should an offender get in jail is something I get asked a lot. And the amount of time in many ways is not going to, it never, people get a life sentence sometimes with sexual abuse. So
not
what
in
I
Canada.
No, in terms of the person who has experienced sexual abuse, they live with that throughout their lives, can. And I think the other piece is the justice system is difficult. It is geared towards the offender. We've done a lot of work to make it more accessible for people and for children, but you know, it's still having to talk to police and go to court and wait for court dates and go to court on 2 occasions, and in many cases having to speak in front of people about some very private things. Yes. So it's very challenging to do that. There are many people that do it, and it's another part of the bravery that Karen talked about and the courage, but I think it's critical that people know that that's an important way to stop abuse, but I also think that there are other ways to heal as well. Yeah. And even if someone doesn't get found guilty, it's really what the person knows about what happened to them that we have to help with the healing.
Yeah, and that's a whole other, I don't mean to minimize, we're going to move on to another question, but we could do a whole series of, or part of a show on the whole justice system and in the healing part for a survivor. I mean, in the peer support group that I facilitate, I mean, you know, the guys in my groups, I mean, the whole, I mean, that's a whole trauma. The guys get re-victimized going through the justice system. Going through that whole thing is horrendous. And I'm not going to put you ladies on the spot, but I mean, it's hard enough, and then to have to deal with the judges in this country is a joke. And I'll leave that alone, and we're going to move on because there's something else that I want to throw out there, and this is, you know, we talk about the responsibility of the people, and Karen, I'm gonna throw that to you. We talked about a little bit about that yesterday, and I'd like you to kind of to explain that a little bit more.
Sure. The name of our organization is long, but we are the Community Child Abuse Council for a reason. Yes. The responsibility for understanding this issue and being aware of its impact on our entire community rests with all of us. So this is a community issue. This is not a children's issue. This is not simply a mental health problem. We have a a collective and shared responsibility, and we are collectively and in a shared way, we're all impacted by this. It affects every possible corner of our community, and it holds us back as a community when we don't address this. So it's not about one organization. Yes, we are the place in town where children who have been through sexual abuse are sent for treatment, and we'll continue to do that for as long as we need to. And we are committed in our mandate to the prevention and education work as well. But our community's response to childhood sexual abuse can't rest with one organization. It can't rest with whispered conversations that people find really tough. That's never going to get us anywhere. No. So, you know, we talk about our collective obligation and we talk about our collective action around this in a number of ways. Number one, we have to be speaking about this. We are never going to get ahead of this issue if we can't talk about it. And think about the message that we send when we do talk about this and we do that in a whisper. If that's the best we can do, that sends a message to children that this is not something adults like to talk about. It works against all of what we're trying to do. And so I think we need to be a lot more comfortable talking about this. We need to be a lot less hung up on talking about the things that aren't helpful to kids and focused on what it's going to take for those kids to not be victims, to not be survivors, but for those kids to thrive. Yeah. Brenda can speak to some of the specific things that are helpful for children who've been through this and supportive to families. Yeah. And we as a community have to do all of that we can.
Let me ask you this, because we're starting to run out of time. We're just a little bit over 2 minutes. Talk about the phone numbers, though, and when you're dealing with the child. And we talked a little bit about it at break.
I think one of the things that I really want to say quickly, because it's important that we say this, is that we have taught our children growing up to don't talk to strangers. It's critical that the audience seeing this knows that over 80% of the people who victimize children are someone they know or someone they're related to, right? And that's very important. So when, you know, and it is against the law. So, you know, when someone breaks the law, if we think a child's in need of protection, we absolutely not only have an ethical and legal responsibility, we have a moral responsibility to intervene and call Children's Aid or call the police, because these children can't use their voices and grow up to adults who have a really difficult time. So, you know, we do a lot of work at the council around breaking safe sexual touching rules. Kids need to learn about what, you know, how to even use correct names for body parts, and if someone's doing something inappropriate, to get help and tell someone and keep telling someone until they're believed. But the bottom line is, until we as adults start opening our ears and being able to talk about the word sexual or private parts or any of those words, and I could give you a list because I could win on Jeopardy for slang words for private parts that I've learned from kids. But the key piece is we have to be open to hear it, and we all have a responsibility to protect these kids so they don't grow up to be adults to have the difficulties that they have. So the numbers that you're seeing are, you know, to help you everyone understand that we have a responsibility, and if someone needs safety, whether it's an adult or child, there are services out here to help, but people need to understand that they don't even have to leave their home to help. Being able to listen and hear when someone's a survivor or has been through something is probably the biggest healing factor. But in addition, if someone is sexually abusing a child, it's against the law, and that child is unsafe, and we need, as adults, to keep children safe.
Yeah, and you know, when I was speaking in schools in Niagara, along with CARSA, the Niagara Sexual Assault Center, and a lot of the kids, you know, we were doing it was actually a program for grade 7 and 8 boys, and we told them, you know, if something's happening to you at home and nobody's believing you, you come to school, and you tell your teacher, because it is by law the teacher has to report it to either Children's Aid or the police. So, I mean, it's so important, and you touched on it before, because the children are so, you know, not being believed, and it's so important for us to believe when a child says that something's happening to them, that it is true. we have to believe the child.
I just want to say one
Okay,
thing.
actually, we have to wrap. We're totally out of time. We'll have to do it again next time. I want to thank you so much for watching the program today. For Brenda, for Karen, I'm Glenn Allen, and thank you for watching tonight. And we'll catch you again next time. Thank you so much. Good night.